Have you found lately that you really have to make an effort to do something that exists in the real world as opposed to in digital space? You know, you get that thing in your hand, that phone, and it wants you to look at it. It wants you to stop reading the book that you had in your hand. It wants you not to go throw a tennis ball for your dog. It wants you to do things that happen inside the space. And that the phone is kind of a portal, too. It takes you away from your world. Well, that's the conversation we're going to have today. To what degree is that really becoming toxic? To what degree is that really almost causing an extinction of what we think about as real human experience? And I think, spoiler, it kind of is doing that. But we'll tell you a lot more after the proverbial this. So unless you're one of the people who really just never engage with the digital universe, you're probably having some conversations with yourself about to what degree your phone and all those related connected devices, to what degree are those interfering with your enjoyment of real life or just your experience of real life? Christine Rosen is our guest today. She's written the book about that, The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World. She's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, columnist for Commentary Magazine, senior editor at the New Atlantis, and fellow at the University of Virginia's Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture. That's a lot of jobs. She doesn't have any time to look at TikTok. But yes, I mean, ironically, we're having this conversation on Zoom, so we're already using some technology that distances us a little bit from one another. Also, ironically, in order to do the taping of this interview at a certain time, I had to miss most of the experience that I cherish every morning where I gather informally with somewhere between 8 and 14 other human beings and their dogs. And my dog, and we all walk around for about 90 minutes or something and talk about stuff that has nothing to do with anything. And that's a very important thing. But this is a very important topic. So, Christine, get us going on this topic.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry I undermined a real life experience for you. We should all have as many of those as possible. It's interesting that part of what drove me to write this book in the first place was the realization that it's just so much easier and so many choices in life were being structured around not being face to face with other people. And I worried that we, as a people, are starting to prefer that in situations where, in this case, it's great. We can have a wonderful conversation. We don't, if we want to, we can see each other's faces over Zoom. It's better than the alternative of not being able to do that at all. However, I worry that we're starting to prefer these easier, more convenient, efficient ways of interacting. And what that leads to long term is a sort of de-skilling of some basic human skills, looking each other in the eye, learning how to get along, just being able to talk to strangers in a way that allows for general sociability. I think we're losing some of those skills because we have become so reliant on our technologies.
One of the things that I thought about reading your book was the Fitbit. And I used to have a Fitbit, and I used to tell people that if you grow up in a family where you were unconditionally loved, the Fitbit probably won't work very well. But if you're, so starved for affirmation that you would try to make a little device on your wrist happy by working harder, then you'll probably get in really good shape. But I mean, the weird thing about the Fitbit, to your premise, I think, is at a certain point, so you download the app, you get the thing on your wrist, the thing on your wrist talks to the app about what you've done all day, and then you sit down at the end of the day and you look at the app, and the app sometimes like releases balloons to tell you that and you're using this virtual experience as confirmation and validation of your real life experience. I mean, it really should be the other way around, right? We should test digital perceptions in real life to see if they hold up very well out there in the flesh. We're doing the exact opposite. We've turned over the whole question of whether we exercised our real bodies or not to a whole kind of almost international digital court that's judging us.
Yes, there's a sense in which we're outsourcing a lot of our internal emotional experiences to technology. And the trade-off, you get a lot of data, which, by the way, isn't just yours privately to look at, but shared with the company that sold you the device. But we're also, I think, making ourselves more machine-like in our own behavior. So the Fitbit, I have friends who love their Fitbit. They have competitions about who had so many steps on which day, and it's a motivating tool for them. And so when I raise questions about it with them, they'll poo-poo that and say, well, you're just being old-fashioned, because I find it helpful. The question, though, is, are we starting, not just with Fitbits, but particularly when it comes to human interactions on social media, for example? Instagram is a perfect example of this. So there's a real difference between having an experience in real life, like you have every morning when you meet other dog owners, taking a picture of it and posting it on a social media site. That's one thing. But what I see a lot of us doing more and more is posing for the platform, doing something that's Instagram worthy, or that is posed in just such a way that it suits the platform. And that's a qualitative difference in experience. And the concern going forward is that because our technologies are such powerful tools for measuring everything, not just our steps, but our feelings, our internal monologues, all these ways in which the technology is trying to encroach on the human body, means that we have fewer and fewer tools to understand ourselves absent the technology.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the tricky part of this is that none of this, or very little of it, can be boiled down to purely good or bad. Everything kind of has a little of each in it. I mean, yes, so travel has been, we did a whole show about this, but travel has been kind of compromised and wrecked and imposed in a really ugly way on certain places. Like in Barcelona, there's a hill that, they don't want anybody to go to anymore, simply because so many people wanted to bring a bottle of wine up there and take a picture for Instagram of them doing this thing. And it's a good thing if people are motivated to maybe climb a hill they wouldn't have climbed, or to, really go out and have an experience somewhere that they wouldn't have gone otherwise. The problem is if the motivation of the social media part of it becomes bigger than the actual hike up the hill, you have a kind of digital tail wagging an analog dog, which I think is a lot of what you're saying.
Yes, and travel is a very good example. I would argue that most of what people do when they travel with a mediating device at the ready at all times isn't travel, because it's tourism. Travel involves a certain amount of risk, a certain amount of discovery, serendipitous moments, calamities in some cases. You get lost, you find your way back. That's travel, at least the way we used to understand how humans travel. When we have a device in our hand, we're tourists, and we have a guide, and the guide is our technology, and it's extremely useful. I use these tools all the time myself. But again, the question becomes, at what point does the qualitative experience change? If everybody's going and taking the same pictures on, the same hill and the same place in Barcelona, there's a weird homogenization of experience that used to be about discovery. So now we aren't the ones doing the discovering. We're outsourcing that to the device and the app, or whatever tool we're using that's the technological means for discovery.
There's a paragraph or a series of paragraphs I saw quoted on Monday in a newsletter I get in my inbox, but it was from a 1946 novel by Mervyn Peake called Titus Groan. And there's this incredible description of the love people have for whatever's at the center of their world. And at one point, it talks about the love of the painter standing alone and staring at the great colored surface he's making, standing in the room with the rearing canvas that stares back. And the those twisted tubes, the fresh paint squeezed and smeared across the dry on his palette, and the dust beneath the easel, and the smell in his rented room where he's doing this painting. And there's I was really brought up short by it, partly because I was thinking about your thesis too, that we are constantly told that you can do some version of this in digital space, in virtual space. But you read that, you hear that, and you realize there are sensory details that connect us to the center of our love for the world.
Yes.
And those things are not available in the place that you've been writing about.
Exactly. And that's the difference between, that's a qualitative difference. And I keep saying the word qualitative because we live in a world where unless something is quantitatively measured, it doesn't matter. And part of what I wanted to convey in this book is a sense of, no, qualitative differences do matter. So whether that's you're talking, via text with someone, or you're looking them in the eye and talking to them. We are physically embodied creatures. We are meant to see each other in physical space and to read each other's unspoken signals, facial expressions, hand gestures. As you say, this is how you best understand a new place: the scent of it, the tone of even the way that a train whistle sounds in one country versus another. There are a million little distinctions that we experience and we're wired to experience this way. The world that we live in. So when we substitute that, and I think art and painting is a perfect example. We live at a time where most of our experiences are what I would call look down experiences. We're always looking down at our phone for guidance, for communication, for connection. And that's a very powerful tool. We need to cultivate more look up experiences. So if you go to a museum, just sit and look at a piece of art. Submit yourself to the vision of another human who has created something that he or she wants you to try to understand. That takes a willingness to just look, not to take a picture, not to text a friend, just to sit and look.
One question that you've clearly thought about, and you've been asked about it too, is the question of whether this is a continuum or whether it's more of a Thomas Kuhn type of paradigm shift. I mean, we go back to Tocqueville. Tocqueville talks about how democracy divides people from their contemporaries, turns them back towards themselves as opposed to the groups, and threatens to enclose the person entirely in the solitude of his own heart. And you can go from there. I mean, Marx talks about alienation. Durkheim talks about anomie. Then we've got David Reisman talking about the lonely crowd, and whoever wrote The Pursuit of Loneliness, and Douglas Putnam writing Bowling Alone. And there's this, and you can add to that stuff like, Bella's Habits of the Heart. These the constant assessments of human society, and what's getting lost and what's needs to be restored. So this isn't a new conversation. On the other hand, I think I agree with you. We've been through a revolution that is not a continuum. I feel as though we've jumped into a space that never existed before, and that's not the same. It may share qualities with those thinkers, but what you're writing about feels different.
Yes, I admire all of those thinkers for stepping back and trying to understand these broader shifts in how we interact, not just as individuals, but as societies, as cultures, how we solve problems. This is all impacted by that. The difference now, I think, is the scale, the speed, and the scope of these technologies. So we have had very little time for our evolutionarily developed brains to cope with the transformation that these technologies brought. If you think about earlier technologies like, the radio, television, landline telephones, there were decades for people to kind of adjust to bringing these devices, particularly into their private homes. We also now are connected to an entire global world. I joke, only half kidding, that it's physically easier for me to send a text message to someone on the other side of the world than it is to tie my own shoes. It physically is easier to do that. That is new. And then finally, and this, I think, going forward and thinking about the kind of future we want to shape for ourselves and our children, it's very much, these technologies aren't just in our private homes all the time now, like the television was, like the radio was. They're on our physical bodies almost all the time. The smartphone is the thing most people reach for first thing in the morning and the last thing they touch at night. It's physically on their person a lot. If you look at patents that technology companies are proposing, many of them want to embed forms of sensors on the physical body so that they can be monitoring in real time all the time how you're feeling, signs of stress, anxiety, fear. So this is now an extremely intimate tool. And its capability to gather information about ourselves, perhaps information we don't even think we are sharing, is worrisome if we care about privacy and we care about people being able to have that backstage area that human beings all need, where they can just be themselves.
Yeah, I mean, obviously McLuhan would have been completely freaked out by smartphones.
Yes.
I mean, he's there in your book. I mean, running through a lot of what you say there. Let me ask you one last question before we go to a break here, because I think one of the arguments that this is a paradigm shift, and maybe even something more than that, it's there in your title, The Extinction of Experience. And I know that you chose that word very deliberately, extinction, and because that's a bigger thing. And I don't know, can you make the case that there are, in fact, experiences that are teetering on the verge of actual extinction?
Yes, the phrase itself, the extinction of experience, comes from a naturalist, Robert Michael Pyle, who was worried about people, young people in particular, lacking hands-on experience in the real world of nature, and then not caring if a species went extinct, for example. So I think that now applies to all of us when we think about living in the real world and how much of it we mediate. So handwriting, for example, many people can't really write by hand any longer. There was no top-down decision by a technologist or a company that said, let's eliminate handwriting. It's just kind of happened, right? We formed different habits. Now, what does that mean? Is that even a big deal? I happen to think it is, because it means we have an entire generation of Americans who can't read our founding documents anymore, because those were written in cursive, and they can neither read nor write in cursive. So is that something that's going extinct that matters? I think it does. I think there's both a qualitative and a really deep-rooted need for humans to be able to communicate in a range of ways. And we are narrowing that range to just a technological or image-based culture. And so we lose something. And accounting for that loss is important, because we can make a different choice. Just like we can encourage conservation in our natural environment, we can decide that some of these skills, some of these human skills, being able to read each other's facial expressions, being able to write by hand, we can choose to preserve these and to cultivate them.
I do have to say, Christine, you are the only left-handed person. I'm left-handed too. You're the only left-handed person I know who has any nostalgia for handwriting.
It's so much harder for us.
You're kind of a race traitor almost.
I know.
Because it's like, L.F. Lee Bailey actually petitioned Harvard when he was a law student there to let him type his final exams, because it's just so hard to write on those curved desks that curve out from the right.
Yes.
Oh, God, it's horrible.
The world is against us.
I admire the fact that you rose above your limitations. I didn't. Anyway, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with more.
A time for summer skies, for hummingbirds and butterflies, for tender words that harmonize with love. Time for climbing.
So we're back. We are back with Christine Rosen. Her book is The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World. Speaking of disembodied, I actually sense that my producer, Lily Tyson, is not interested in my bringing this up, but you bring it up in your book, and I think it's really interesting. One of the things that you write about that is a big part of the digital experience is pornography, is Pornhub, is stuff like that. And Clay Shirky, in one of his books about the internet, he talks about how if something is, I mean, this seems obvious, but if something's easy to do, then people do it a lot more. Whatever friction you take away makes the experience. And I mean, I always think about, I'm really old, so I remember before there were photocopies, it was really hard to copy things. They had these really things called mimeographs, and they were smelly and streaky. It was really hard to make 20 copies of something, so people didn't do it unless they really had to. And now, you know, with Pornhub and stuff like that, people's access to this kind of experience on a very disembodied basis is, well, you throw some numbers out there that are really kind of astonishing.
Shocking.
And I think one of them was like 67% of, I don't know, young men said that watching porn on their phones was part of, you know, a regular sexual experience or amounted to a legitimate sexual experience, something like that. I don't know. It's something we don't like to talk about, but there's something very disturbing about all that.
Well, I think it signals something that goes well beyond even the damage that porn can cause. And that's if you create a culture where you expect things on demand, if you create a culture where things are easy and where the habits of mind that you form around getting what you want makes you impatient with dealing with any sort of delay, anything that doesn't suit exactly what you want when you want it. You then bump into trouble when, for example, you want to meet someone who you might, you know, want to marry and raise a family with, because if you're habituated at a pretty young age, which unfortunately, when it comes to porn, happens at younger and younger ages for kids, when you're exposed to that, and when that becomes the expectation, it's difficult to reconcile a real human being. And there are these heartbreaking stories of young men and young women who talk about the challenge, just the difficulty of getting to know someone to whom they're attracted, because they have these habits of mind and these expectations that have been formed far earlier based on their use of a mediated experience of sex that is designed, in fact, just like slot machines in Vegas are designed to do this, to really give them a true physical and emotional response. But it is not the same as the real thing. So having to reconcile the real thing when they finally confront it with what their experience has been, this mediated and on-demand and very manipulative form of experience that nonetheless feels real to them, that is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge, and it goes well beyond people's sex lives. It's almost any pleasure in life now. You can choose the easier, frictionless, seamless, mediated, on-demand version, which means it's harder for you to experience the real thing.
Yeah, it kind of means that everything is essentially wallpaper. You know, even your orgasm is wallpaper. It's just it's easily obtained, and it doesn't really stand out at a certain point because you didn't have to do any work to get it.
Exactly.
So, you know, contrast that. Here's the place where you and I are in danger of parting company, but not in a serious way, I don't think. But so one of the things that you argue is that our experience of boredom and our experience of tedium are being interfered with. That I a few years ago heard the comedian Christopher Hardwick say, "I've forgotten how to wait." By which he means if he's waiting for his friends to show up at something, he's just on his phone, you know? He's not having an experience of waiting. I don't know. That's okay with me. I really don't like waiting. I like the fact that I could be doing something while I'm waiting. But you're worried about that. Say why.
Well, I think in part it's because it's not that I want everyone to be bored and in some sort of neo-Victorian stage of punishment every moment they're waiting for a bus. It's that there's an opportunity cost to not being bored. We're always entertained if we spend every red light, every stop sign, every, wait in a doctor's office with our heads buried in our phones, being entertained or connected to people we know. Two things don't happen. One, we don't look around and notice the world around us, which means we might not notice a fellow human in need. But more importantly, we don't let our minds have a break from constant stimulation, from constant information. We don't let our minds wander. And as we know from history, literature, science, unusual things happen when your mind wanders. Serendipitous connections are made, new ideas form, weird tangents of thought. You can go off on them and let your mind wander. We need those. I sort of describe them like the fallow periods of cultivation of a field. You need to let your mind have those moments of respite from constant stimulation, constant connection. And we are choosing to never have those in the interest of always being connected, always being entertained. And again, especially for younger people. We're forming expectations and habits of mind that mean later on in life, when they are forced to wait without that sort of stimulation, it's much, much more difficult for them to do that, to just sit still and wait, particularly in uncomfortable situations like, say, a hospital emergency room.
Okay, so you did an interesting thing, and it's something that I've wanted to do, and I've never done it, which is, and specifically at this place, and I think it's connected to what you're just talking about, which, by the way, you were very persuasive. But you went to Gethsemane. This is, I believe, in Kentucky. It's the place most associated with Thomas Merton. It's a Trappist retreat where you have to pray a whole bunch of times a day, including at ungodly hours of the night or morning. Say why you did it and what the takeaway was.
So I will tell your listeners first, it's a total cliche. Writers love to go to monasteries and have, great insights. So I lived the cliche. I thought I was going to go and learn about sort of patience and attentiveness and, all the things that people think they'll get in a monastery. But surprisingly, what I found was a really stunning example of the joy of waiting. Because when you watch these, the brothers who gather, multiple times a day to pray, who have their role, who have a very structured life, the reason they have that structure in their life and the reason they limit the distractions in their life is that they're waiting to hear the voice of God. And it is a joyful waiting. They are keeping themselves open to that experience throughout their day, throughout their lives, because they've committed their life to this work. And for me, that was very moving because I found it difficult to keep the schedule, not just because you had to get up at 3:30 in the morning and then again at 5:30, but because when you don't have distraction, and we didn't bring distractions into the monastery, it's difficult. We didn't speak to each other. There's a lot of mandatory silence. I took a lot of long walks in the beautiful countryside. You are alone with your thoughts a lot of the day. And it is surprising where your mind will wander. And that was a kind of waiting. My brain was like, oh, I will adjust to this. And it takes time, but it does give you interesting insights and a heightened level of awareness about the places and people around you that I found really fascinating.
I have to tell you a joke. Lily's going to get mad at me because I'm wasting time, but you can use it in your next interview. So this guy goes to a Trappist monastery and enrolls fully, and the abbot says you have to be silent for a year. You come back in a year. You can say one word, and so he comes back in a year and he says the, and the abbot says, all right, it's going to be 2 more years before you can say another word. So 2 more years goes by. He comes back and he says food. And the abbot says, all right, 2 more years, and you can go back and you can say one more word. 2 more years goes by, and he shows up, and he says to the abbot, stinks. And the abbot says, you've been here 5 years. You've done nothing but complain.
I like it. It's a
you
good
can
joke.
use it somehow. You can fit it in somehow. But see, here's an interesting thing. I just told you a joke, and I didn't get to see your face, and we weren't in the same room, and I wasn't even quite sure whether you were going to laugh at it or not. There really is. I know that you've been to comedy clubs recently where you got to put the phone in the zipper because you just aren't here, and you need to really be there for comedy. Comedy is something you can't feign a response to comedy either. You're either laughing for real or you're not. It's in some ways a very, very real experience. But it is interesting that those clubs have figured out you can't have a phone and do this.
Yes, it is fascinating. I mean, part of it, I think, is that, and we all know this because we've all seen a creepy politician smile, like where it's an inauthentic fake smile, and you're like, why am I feeling chills down the back of my neck? Not the good kind. But when you're enjoying any sort of live performance, but specifically comedy, which I think really tries to dig deep into the good and bad parts of human nature, if done well, you are having a group experience. And so I have gone to clubs where everybody has their phone out, they allow some video, but it's the experiences where everybody has to lock their phone away. And suddenly you're laughing together with strangers. And it's a wonderful feeling. I mean, if you go to a concert, where there's dancing and stuff, the same thing can happen. If you contrast that with any sort of public entertainment experience where everybody has their phone aloft, screen glowing as they film whatever it is that's happening in front of them. Again, it's a qualitatively different thing. And I really love being in that group of a darkened room with a bunch of strangers, and you've got this brave human up on the stage trying to make us all laugh. And when a joke really lands, it's a wonderful feeling, I'm sure, for the comedian, but also for the audience. You're all acknowledging something that's deeply human and deeply weird, or deeply transgressive in some cases, but it's it's a release, and it's a public experience, but we're all having our private reaction together, and we're losing those experiences as well, I think.
All right, we're going to grab a quick break here. We have one more segment in which we can talk still more to Christine Rosen. Christine Rosen's book is The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World. We'll be back after the proverbial this.
Sex in the city has become a garrison state.
I don't care if she's pretty.
I don't care if they ain't. I may never go back to the real thing again.
I may never go back to the real thing again.
Time to say a word or two of thanks. The maestro, Dylan Reyes, is our technical producer today. Our senior producer, Lily Tyson, is the producer of this particular episode. The episode is with Christine Rosen. Her new book is The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World. So, in a way, this conversation, the conversation that we're having, the conversation that your book starts, is a conversation we would have had to have anyway. But I feel as though the pandemic kind of, put the pedal to the metal a little bit. I mean, suddenly everything was virtual. Church was virtual, work was virtual. Everything was on Zoom. And when that abated, we had to have a conversation about what needed to come back at the level of experience, at the level of humanity. And I don't think the conversation's over. I was talking to a judge the other day who said they're having trouble hiring prosecutors because young lawyers coming out of college don't want a job where they have to go to work 5 days a week. They want to negotiate that. Could it be 2? Could it be 3? Maybe say a little bit about this. I mean, it's good, right? In a way, we pushed it so far into that extreme that we had to at least have a conversation about what needed to be restored.
Yes, I think particularly for older Americans, spending that much time staring at a screen all day, which was not generally the rule for them, really struck them as unhealthy or worrisome. But there are a couple of caveats I'll say to that, is that I think it did help habituate some younger Americans into this idea that it is easier and just the same to do your job by staring at someone on a Zoom call as it is to be in an office where you might bump into someone from accounting who has an idea you should hear, or happen serendipitously to cross paths in a cafeteria with someone else. Those sorts of experiences are very important for most organizations to have a healthy culture. And I think it's going to take some more persuasion on the part of the old timers like myself to convince the younger generation that there's value in that. And I think that's important work. But I also worry that in what it's forced us to do in a good way, but also in a challenging way, is to defend the human things. And by that, I mean, we now live in a world with a powerful enough technology and platforms and tools at our disposal that we can actually mediate so many experiences, and we can have information about the world without very much direct experience in it. And so that means we have to start making choices, like put down the phone when you go to the museum, set it aside and go out into nature. Don't photograph every moment of your life and post it on Instagram. We've heard these warnings for years, so that's not new. But now the human is on the back foot. And if you look ahead to some of the things that are being promised and touted with AI, we'll have to do that even more. So now is the time where we have to have those conversations and start drawing those very healthy boundaries just for ourselves as individuals, as families, but also as culture and communities, because an entire culture that can't wait very well is very bad at long-term planning and political solutions to difficult problems. And we start to see that in our politics and in our interactions as Americans in ways that I think should disturb us and get us thinking about these challenges ahead.
Another thing that's happened that I think is going to be very hard to undo. So, Facebook is very, very good at helping people find one another. So if you have a very rare disease, you can find the other people who have this rare disease, people you would just never meet on an analog basis. You can find those people. Or like I like the old Walt Kelly comic strip Pogo. Well, I can join a group of people who really like Pogo. Of course, one of the problems, you might actually have a psychogenic disease, and there might be like 100 other people who think they have the same disease that's not even real. So even that benefit could be a little bit of a trap. But the biggest problem is you cannot find people who believe in some wacky idea like QAnon. And to me, that's been a terrible harm that you can just find people who agree with you about stuff, and then you're much freer to reject people who don't think the way that you think. And I think rather than being people who can have a conversation and maybe even a little bit of a controlled, mediated argument, we've just become people who are running to our respective silos. This is not an original criticism, but it's mine anyway.
Well, no, I think it's important though, because what it says, and I think you're absolutely right, is that we can no longer assume that we all live in a shared reality. And we don't even really have, I jokingly said in real life a few times while we've been talking, but there is no real life, online life. The barrier is gone, that's destroyed. We are constantly living in the real world and online simultaneously. And I think your fear is a grounded one. You can craft a world for yourself where you are completely in your own bubble, in your own reality. And indeed, a lot of these technologies use that as a positive thing. It's like, oh, use our platform and then you'll be surrounded by people who are like-minded. For a heterogeneous, large, geographically and ethnically diverse country like ours, that is not good, because we do not have to agree, but we all have to find ways to get along. And I think a lot of the polarization in our politics is a result of the fact that we all kind of bought into this idea that the internet was going to be the new town square, and we'd all argue productively with each other and come to solutions. Well, the platform was not designed to do that. It's designed to reward anger, fear, anxiety, strong emotions. It's not really designed to get us to all, come together and have a group hug. So we know this, but we're only at the early stages of figuring out how to fix that. And coming back to some sort of semblance of a shared reality is an important first step.
So as we're heading towards the end of this conversation, I want to hear about some of your thoughts about just different habits of the heart that might help us out. And I also want to donate one, because while I've been reading your book, I've been thinking a lot about my dog and how I think my dog, I could be projecting, but I think my dog has already figured out that this rectangular thing in my hand that I'm looking at is his enemy. It's the reason I'm not throwing a tennis ball right now. It's the reason we haven't started off to go for a walk in the woods in the late afternoon. And so my new thing is, if you can't explain to your dog what you're doing and why you're doing it, that should bother you. Like if your dog
I like this rule.
Yeah, if your dog wouldn't understand, even if he could understand more of your speech, he still wouldn't understand why you were doing this. Then you should be worried about it. But I want to know some of your rules or fixes or takeaways here.
Well, I used to be one of those people. I mean, I've been following this stuff since the era pre-Facebook and the era of MySpace. So I've thought a lot about this. I used to think, a digital Sabbath. We'll have these rules, that rules. I think all of that is all well and good, but it's not enough. We do need, we need some regulations of some of these platforms. I will leave it to my regulatory expert colleagues to figure out what those are, but we do need to keep kids off of some of these platforms till they're old enough to understand what they're using. But most of these, as you say, they're habits of the heart, habits of the mind. We have to start in our individual lives making those choices. So I see a lot of parents pushing strollers, staring at their phone. So that means the kid in that stroller is not having a conversation or hearing or getting any sort of interaction from this massive amount of fascinating information they're getting just by being rolled down a sidewalk, right? So we also need to do that with each other and have more face-to-face conversations. It's really important. If you look at rates of loneliness in this country, if you look at rates of isolation, how few Americans know the names of their own neighbors. This is not good. This is not good for the fabric and health of our society. So we need to, again, put the phone down, go out into the real world. It's great when people find communities online. I am not knocking those communities, but a real community is full of people who will show up at your door and help you when you need it, who will give you a ride to the airport, who will do all these difficult human tasks of helping each other when needed, not on demand, but when, and not just when it's convenient. So again, in everyone's daily lives, I think, put your phone down when you're at a stoplight. Don't look at it. Don't check your phone. Go to a public space and don't bring your computer or your phone, and just watch. Read a book or look around, but don't constantly bombard yourself or put a layer between yourself and the people and spaces around you.
So last question, circa the 1980s, the then journalist Tom Wolfe talked about a third great awakening, which he was not entirely down with, but he was sort of saying basically one response to corporatization at that time was this movement towards Zen and lots of other stuff like that, that people did get into this whole chop wood, carry water, holistic mindset, and people were more interested in Eastern religions and yoga and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I mean, is it possible that we might have a fourth great awakening that, in fact, that, every action begets a reaction? One possible reaction would be to get a lot more crunchy granola about our lives, just to save ourselves.
Yes, I mean, get analog, I guess, would be the way to describe that. And that's going to look like a different thing for different people, right? It's going to be, you mentioned vinyl records. It's going to be people listening to vinyl instead of having a Spotify account. And that's great. But it's also going to mean people actively, as groups, trying to create particularly public spaces that aren't totally colonized by technology. I mean, those coffee shops, those taverns, those meeting places, the wonderful third places, as sociologists call them, where you're not at work, you're not at home, but you're in a sociable public space where things can happen. You can meet new people. You can bump into others who you've never, whose lives are very different from your own, but you're all equal in this space. That is, I think, those little thriving places are the really important building blocks for a healthy democracy, for healthy sociability, and also to train each new generation and just simply how to behave, how to be a good person in public, how to be thoughtful and kind and patient with others, even if they're not behaving at their best. These little things accumulate and matter. And when you think of how kind of brutal and impatient and sometimes just plain mean our culture has become, I think a lot of people will start trying to find other ways to do that. And that's all for the good.
I think it's mean more than sometimes. But yes, I take your point. Christine Rosen, the book is really interesting, and I think it will change some people's lives. The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
All right. And we're gone, but we'll come back. We'll do another show tomorrow.
Was it yesterday or a long time ago? Time to remember, time to let go. Time for the flowers, time for the snow. Time goes too fast, time goes too slow. Was it yesterday or a long time ago? Time to remember, time to let go. Time for the flowers, time for the snow. Time for the clown, time for the poet. My time is passing before I know it. My